All right. My name is Susan Chen, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Nutrition, Food Science, and Packaging at San Jose State University, and I am honored to be moderating this panel this morning. So the title of this panel is called Agroecology, Cooperatives, and Urban Agriculture. I wanted to break down the definition of agroecology for us in this room because to me personally, I think out of all three of these words, this is the one that tends to be the most scientific. We might have a good idea of what urban agriculture is just by, who is in this room and what we're seeing within our community. We have a good idea of what cooperatives are, so working together in groups to bring about change. But agroecology is that scientific word that I believe once we get into our presentations, we will know exactly what this is. But the definition of agroecology is simply a way of redesigning food systems from the farm to the table with a goal of achieving ecological, economic, and social sustainability. So for today's panel, our first speaker will be Chris Bacon. He will be giving an overview of the scientific background of agroecology as well as examples from around the world based on his own experiences. Then we'll have Patrick, who is the director of Stanford Educational Farm, and then Derek, who is the founder of We Start Gardens, who will give us some more examples relevant to our local communities. So I'll go ahead and hand this off to Chris.
Thank you so much, and feel free to keep us on time, and that goes for me as well. It's terrific to be here. I'm just going to jump in. What I wanted to do with this is kind of provide you guys with a little bit of an overview to have some vocabulary and some concepts that could be useful for our planning. I think it's been used, as you'll see, by organizations, social movements, cooperatives, universities, governments, international agencies around the world, and I think now is the time to consider it for our work, particularly in the South Bay. I like to start where I begin a lot of this work, just thinking about smallholder farmers worldwide. We know there's over 570 million smallholder farmers around the world, about 2.5 billion people. They provide at least a third of all the food we eat and probably more, and they manage biodiversity and culturally rich landscapes. This is just some landscapes for the work where Mario Henny and I have been working in northern Nicaragua. You see a milpa up there on the right-hand side there, and just the mountain landscape above. And yet, in many places, that's not the story. It's not agroecology, right? And agroecology, to some extent, arose in response to the consequences of the industrialization of agriculture, the mechanization of agriculture, and the Green Revolution, which had some benefits, but it had many costs which were not taken into account. A big part of what we see happening there with the sort of spread on that classic photo of combines across the landscape is a homogenization of the landscape, going from the diversity of relationships to really more singular ecological single crops. And we see that also mapped in this somewhat outdated but still useful diagram about the number of varieties of seeds that were available in the United States from 1903 compared to 1983. Just dramatic decreases. So beets, there were 288 that were commercially available, and then there were 17 by 1983. Some of this diversity is coming back, but it's still that process. So that's led a lot of folks working in food systems to think about how do we turn this around and go from uniformity to diversity, and meeting some of these challenges that food systems are associated with many of you are probably familiar, from a third of greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture is the single biggest land use around the world, and yet from the latest data from FAO, we know there's about 2.3 billion people. So just think about it. U.S. has like 400 million, so that's like, what is that? It's like 6 times the quantity of all people in the United States that were food insecure in 2023. It's just a salient fact about the massive failures of our global food system, which leaves open proposals for change. But unfortunately, many of these proposals for change aren't going in the direction that folks like us would like to see, although in some cases they are. So one of the proposals for change that was developed by the International Panel of Food System Experts is thinking about how we start from more subsistence agriculture, building knowledge, mechanizing, diversifying a little bit to move towards diversified agroecological farming, or how industrial agriculture might also transform into more of a localized, diverse food system. How does this process actually happen, right? And what is it, when we say transformation, what could it look like? So we're talking often about food system transformation. Here's one framework that was originally developed by Steve Gleesman and colleagues, kind of moving. It's very linear, but it gives you at least some initial vocabulary where there's incremental changes, increasing efficiency, substituting inputs at the farm level. That maybe you're substituting chemical input for more of an organic input, which is still significant. Or you're starting to redesign the food system like level 4, where growers and eaters are coming together and forming alternative food networks. I just want to say this is just one way to frame what a transformation might look like. There's a whole literature on transformations, which I'm going to not make you guys get into right now. But one example, this is just a recent review paper that was talking about how frequently it's being used in the different ways that conceptualizations of food system transformation and change, right? From just transition, systemic change, et cetera. So let's break down agroecology a little bit. I think I want you to remember a couple things for the definition of agroecology. First, agroecology is a practice, and it was a practice long before the academics came along and popularized the term, for thousands of years in many cases, certainly hundreds. Farmers that were managing traditional crops, managing ecological relationships, and there's knowledge behind those management practices, right? There's indigenous knowledge, there's farming practice knowledge, and I think that is where it really starts, as a practice, and the knowledge and the work associated with that practice. Second, we can think of it as a social process, right? It's a social process of sharing knowledge in diverse environments, but it's purposely a more horizontal, collaborative social process. Examples for me that inspired my work in graduate school was what my friend and colleague Eric Jimenez was a couple years ahead of me. He documented the campesino movement, which were smallholder farmers in Central America organizing, totally excluded from the system. They went to share practices such as soil conservation, diversified farming, organic management, not certified, but those types of strategies. And they start sharing it through networks of community-based organizations and a network of promoters going community to community. And this expanded to reach hundreds of thousands of farmers across Central America. And it did transform lives, livelihoods, and food systems. Another example just up the road here is Rebecca Turlow's work. Her work documenting the training processes from the Movimento Sem Terra, the landless workers movement of Brazil, and how they trained each other and shared knowledge for building citizenship, civic engagement, access to land, and using agroecology as a tool for this work. Finally, it is also a science, as Susan pointed out in the beginning, and we can think about it as a transdisciplinary scientific approach. And I have to just shout out some of, agroecologists, we like to talk about our academic roots. I mean, one of the big roots we don't have represented in the room today, which goes to our colleagues at the University of Michigan, like Yvette Perfecto and John Vandermeer and those folks. But two of the other roots you actually do hear today, because Miguel Altieri is one of the academic, co-founders of the field, I guess you could say, in its sort of more modern sense, and Steve Gleesman. And Patrick worked with Miguel, and I worked with Gleesman. We all try to collaborate together. So we can think about this evolving definition, just like Susan kicked us off. And I guess I would add a second component. So this is something worth writing down. This might be useful for our breakout sessions later on. The second component is, through a transdisciplinary, participatory, and change-oriented research and action, agroecology relates on core principles to link together science, practice, and movements or social process focused on food system change. So we have that first part and the second part. And we want to think about how these tools can be useful in your organizations, in our organizing. Just a couple of examples. So we go to the context where I work in Central America and with Mario Henny and many other folks. This is two late season hurricanes that hit in 2020. So while the pandemic was starting, or before the pandemic actually, no, after it had already started, there was these two late season hurricanes exacerbated by climate change. You can think about what the average farmer in Nicaragua probably contributed to climate change in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, like less than 1%. And yet they're facing the burden, right? So contributing less, suffering more, that's kind of the climate injustice that we were seeing. And of course, unfortunately, climate change is not our only problem. And that's now we're seeing cumulative hazard environments. So they were dealing with past problems, some political unrest, price increases, droughts, and we're all living in multi-hazard environments now too. I think we have been for a while, but now it's more clear for us in California and other places. So we are able to partner for a lot of this work with co-ops. And I think I wanted to take just a minute to talk about some of the co-op organizing which could be useful here. Co-ops are enterprises that are legally constituted around a set of common 7 principles, and maybe Antonio and some other folks will help us talk about these principles in the future. There's different types of co-ops. We're working with farmer co-ops that are marketing their, in this case, coffee and cacao through international value chains, but that's not how they started, right? They actually started at, well, it goes back to the 1970s when they were mostly workers. Many who were illiterate, but others that were well organized. And then they organized to access land, won a revolution against a dictator, and became kind of collectivized on the land. And eventually the structure that they did after the Sandinistas were voted out the first time, they formed cooperatives of individual farmers. They own their own parcels of land, but they market some of their products together. So they have credit together, and they market, in this case, coffee or sometimes corn or other products together. And they organize and they link to a values-based purchasing agreement, which was called fair trade at the time. And that was one strategy to help them access credit and organize and support their organizations. What they did is they had professional staff working these organizations as well. So ProDeCoop, one example that started in 1992, soon after the government shift in 1990, now they have a network of 35 smaller community-level co-ops that have 20 to 50 farmer members. So each of those co-ops then came together to form a general assembly and a union of co-ops. That union of co-ops represents those 35 organizations, which all together represent about 2,400 families or about 10,000 people. And then that union of co-ops, they hire professional staff, like a general manager, a sales manager, somebody in charge of credit. They're still under the whole governance structure of a co-op, right? And their general manager, she's a badass manager, right? She goes and she can sit down and negotiate with Starbucks, the World Bank, and go into a community and share and rendir cuentas, like share how the money has been spent with the community members, right? So that makes a huge difference. And that's how they've influenced legislation in Nicaragua, in Central America, and internationally for the whole structure of the fair trade movement, which now reaches over 1 million farmers, right? And I was privileged to do some work with them that changed the minimum price of fair trade a couple years ago. So these are the types of partners we want to do is form relationships of solidarity based on community-based participatory action research, where we design studies, collect data, share results, and those results can help with the planning. There's other organizations that we talked about too. We're now working with some cacao growers in the middle part, in the sort of the new area of Huaslala in Nicaragua. There's the Campesino movement. So I won't get into I'm not going to present the research because I want to me what's more useful for you guys are the concepts that you can use we can use for our planning here. So one of the main principles of agroecology, right? So we said it's based on principles. One of those principles is the management of biodiversity, to maintain and enhance diversity, functional diversity, diversity in the farm through time. And Patrick maybe can talk more about how he actually does this in practice on the farms in different places, as could Derek. So there's diversity in the landscape, there's the diversity in the seeds. Another one is land and resource governance. So we just heard about civic engagement. How is the land and resource governed? We know I just put a quick piece of data, like if you have a slightly larger farm, even they're small farmers, in this case they had a number of lean months. Those are food insecure months where people still face seasonal hunger, despite all these, doing many of these practices. So how do we support governance and access to land under these circumstances? Another one of these is social values and diets. Build a food system based on culture, identity, tradition, social, and gender equity, right? These are key things. Anybody recognize this photo? Yeah, this was yesterday at Veggie Lucia with the awesome cooking class, right? We're building, this was to me, that you're putting into practice the social values and diets principle of agroecology. And we see this in the research too. My colleague Rachel Benzer-Kerr at Cornell has documented over decades strong correlations between dietary diversity and farm diversity. So we can start to see, how these relationships play out. So we see the diversification idea, how that relates to values and diets, right? And then if you add in, her work has also shown the importance of gender equity within those households. Co-creating knowledge. Many of us, this is what's happening. We had Claudia and Fernando teaching us on the farm yesterday. These are strategies of sharing knowledge that we talked about. This obviously intersects with some agroecology as social process. This is just an example of some of the best practices that shared, like seed-saving strategies, inoculating compost with, this little picture right up here is like inoculating compost with microorganisms from the forest area, which I think would still be cool to experiment with more around here. And so these are all strategies of co-creating knowledge together. So then, hopefully, now I work my way up to one of those crazy academic diagrams, but the idea is that hopefully this is, you guys see all these different principles coming together, right? So this is the principle of participation and organizing. I'm not gonna have time to walk you through all of these, but these are the 11 principles that have kind of built off a consultative process, combining the science and dialogue, and how these can come together. How many more minutes? One more minute. Okay, good. Actually, that's perfect. And then we can think about how these principles could link up with different kind of operational goals, like strengthening resilience, or securing social equity, or improving resource efficiency, right? And where those could be targeted within the food system, soil, water, livestock. Is it the household, is it the workers, or on the farm, or in the food system, is it the community, or the value chain, or policies? So we want to use this as a framework for our dialogue today and hopefully some of our future work. That is my proposal, to think about this framework for transformation and to think about how this intersects with challenges like tariffs and government cutbacks and things of these nature. And remember that this resilience and these strategies and this transformation, as Maria Eugenia wrote on an early book, is we have to change ourselves to be part of the change as well. So if we're committing to a transformational change, it also begins with ourselves. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for giving us an overview of agroecology as well as some global examples. So now I'll pass the mic over to Patrick.
Good morning, everybody. Real pleasure to be here with y'all. Chris asked me to say a few words, to just introduce myself a little bit and some of the work that I've done. I started out, I grew up in the South and mostly in Alabama, North Carolina, and I immigrated to California to come to college. I studied, like Chris said, at Berkeley with Miguel Altieri, so I was really privileged to get to work with him for many years, both as an undergrad and then as a grad student, to study agroecology. When I finished school, I went and, I actually dropped out of school and I traveled to Chile, from Tijuana to Chile, and worked with an organization down there called Centro de Educación y Tecnología, and worked on the farm and developed some skills. Went back up and finished at Berkeley, and then decided I wanted more skills, went to the program at UC Santa Cruz, where Chris studied with Gleesman, and lived on their farm and studied organic farming and gardening with the idea of coming back to the city and getting involved in community development through urban agriculture. So I approached the East Bay Asian Youth Center, which at that time was running a multicultural, multi-ethnic youth development collaborative called RISE, and asked Dave Kakashiba if he would take me on as an AmeriCorps member, and he said, okay. And he mentored me, taught me how to write grants, and I tried to take over an old research station that UC Berkeley owns called the Gill Track, which is in Albany, just north of Berkeley. And we almost had it. I had to go around Berkeley. I had to go up to the president's office in Oakland because I got stopped by our dean of College of Natural Resources. But we got, for eBayC Rise, an acre of land, a greenhouse, a head house, permission to sell, and we grew a farm with jobs for teenagers in our program. We did a CSA, we did cut flowers, we did an urban agricultural summer school for the junior high kids, and all this beautiful work, but we got stopped, and it's long stories, but we got into battles with the university, so wasn't able to continue that, but then went, at that time, this was in the 90s, in the late 90s, Clinton had signed a base closure law, and so in Alameda County, all the folks who were serving homeless people banded together to fight for housing, but also for productive resources to create opportunities. So I got 60 acres of land on the old Naval Air Station in Alameda, in conjunction with a bunch of partners, and we developed a nursery, because I learned farming so hard to make money, right? But with a nursery, kind of better jobs, and it's still there. It's called Plowshares Nursery. I don't work anymore with it, but I go buy plants. And then also backyard gardens. We created a youth program called the Bean Beret, and an urban farm. At that time, I also got hired back at Berkeley to teach in a class that I had taken called Urban Garden Ecosystems, and I found that I loved the teaching. So I went back to study more with Miguel, got involved with teaching and connecting my students to the work in the community. And that was my vision, which is a naive vision for research people in research universities. But Santa Clara hired me, so I came here and I was teaching environmental sciences and agroecology, environmental education, things like that. I was also tasked to help start a garden for this campus called The Forge. I think we're going to go there later on. So this little picture is me doing the initial prep of that land. And I could tell you stories about like doing CPR on urban lands to bring them back to life. I just got to go to the 15th anniversary of this garden in the fall, and it's so beautiful to see this space and what everyone here is doing with it. I also created a program called BUG, Bronco Urban Gardens, and we were working in partnership with many partners in San Jose. We created a garden at Alma Community Center. That's a senior center and a center for teens. And we talked to all the neighbors, and they really wanted programs for the young kids. And so we created an after-school program that was kind of based around the garden and food systems. But a really sweet program because of this school has this interesting requirement that was developed while I was here called experiential learning for social justice. Is that still true, Chris? Oh my God, what a great school that they have.
Some of the students in here are in that.
Okay, you have to do this requirement, you know, and so I got to build programs that were aligned with that vision of this school to engage with the community. And we also built a school garden at Gardner Academy Elementary School in the Gardner neighborhood near Alma. And got to do a lot of this great work. Helped to start something called the Health Corps, which was we approached the Health Trust to get an AmeriCorps program going. And at the height of it, I think it no longer exists, but we had 40 AmeriCorps members. Many of our partner organizations, Vegilution, La Mesa Verde, Collective Roots up in East Palo Alto, many folks were receiving AmeriCorps members. So we went to Sacramento to lobby to get this program and then convinced Health Trust to take it on. So that helped give us a boost because we had jobs funded in this field. So I'm talking too much about all of that. I'm supposed to talk about other things. Anyway, that was kind of a little bit about my background working here. My challenge was I had on a year-to-year contract here at Santa Clara, and so this job came up to go to Stanford and build a farm for them. It had been the dream of students for like 30 years to have a farm on their campus, and so I was hired there to figure out where we can do that, pull the money together, build a team, design a farm, and we've now just turned 10, our educational farm. We have about 6 acres up there, so hope y'all can come and visit us. I know many of you have. So I still teach agroecology and am the director of this farm. And Chris asked me to talk a little bit about urban agroecology. So really quickly, these are just some quick slides about our migration as a species into the cities. This is thought to be the largest migrations of humans in our history from rural areas to urban areas. So this is from 1950 to what's projected in 2050. You see this around the world as we urbanize. And also in the United States as we sort of congregate in these urban areas. And so I think, it's a beautiful thing, all of us coming together, and there's so much opportunities. Urban agriculture is this kind of considered by many people an oxymoron. What are you talking about, urban agriculture? But there's been some really cool work done by the United Nations Development Program looking around the world at the production of food in cities. When it's, how do you define urban? They talk about urban agglomerations. So these are large kind of urban areas like our Bay Area here, and even connecting from the Bay Area up to Sacramento, and thinking about these food systems, these spaces of growing food, both within our cities and immediately around us, that actually are quite significant. They found that there's somewhere between 800 million and 1 billion people that are practicing urban agriculture worldwide, and that they estimate roughly 15% of our food is being grown in these urban agglomerations. So we're never going to grow all of our food, but we can grow a key portion of that food, especially the veggies and the fruit, those nutrient-dense foods that we're so much lacking. Most of this production, to be clear, is in the global south, in Africa, and Latin America, and Asia. So we have much to learn from the urban farmers around the world. That said, in this country, we have history in terms of crisis, of vastly enhanced urban production in our cities. It started in Detroit in the late 1800s. There were these series of economic crises. They called them panics back then. And what the city of Detroit did, because there were so many folks out of work, is they provided land and tools and potatoes and seeds for people to plant. And so that kind of kicked off the public support for urban agriculture. And every time there were crises, there was increased public support. During World War I, they were called Liberty Gardens. It was considered patriotic to grow a garden. During the Depression, the Great Depression in the 30s, that they were called relief gardens. And then they kept some data in the World War II. They called them victory gardens, and they estimated that at least 40% of the veggies that were consumed in the United States were grown in backyard gardens and community gardens with the support of our local and our regional governments. So we have this incredible capacity, this opportunity to grow in our cities. Some of our challenges, y'all know these, limited space and the housing crisis. I think Derek's going to speak to this, so we can integrate these things. So they don't have to be at odds, but we absolutely need housing. We can also grow food. Land tenure is something my whole career, 30 years now, I've been fighting for land. And yeah, it's just such a challenge. Gentrification. I have friends that were involved in urban farming in West Oakland, and the real estate folks were using pictures of their gardens to try to convince wealthier people to move in and take those places. So challenges around gentrification. Access to all kinds of resources, water and tools and seeds and information. Lots of toxins and pollutants, and more work needs to be done knowing which grounds are safe to grow on. And then an urban bias in many places against agriculture, having to create new laws that permit us to grow food in cities. With urban agroecology, I think Chris did a great job of kind of giving us some definitions and frameworks. In general, in agriculture, in our history of growing food, you have the very worst, right, of people's relationships with each other and with the land on one end of the spectrum. Just the worst, the most horrific slavery and complete destruction. But you also have the very best. All of our ancestors everywhere figured out how to live in their place on the planet and in collaboration, in community. And they developed ingenious systems, which we call agroecology, to support their communities. And so really, urban agroecology is about community building. It is rooted in cultural practices. You can go to, for instance, up in Oakland, downtown Oakland, near Lake Merritt. There's a garden that was built specifically for refugees. And there's refugees from all over the world. I think the Oakland Unified School District, there are 115 languages spoken in that school district. So people from all over the world coming together, and in that garden, they're keeping their traditional practices alive, but also sharing those practices. There's so much intercultural learning that takes place in these gardens. These gardens are diversified in every way. Diversity, as Chris said, is absolutely key to our practices at every level, to making resilient farm systems. And these spaces, as we know, are physically, mentally, and spiritually nourishing. These are sacred places, and they're resource conserving. They come in so many forms and scales. And they make great improvements to the urban environment. So when we talk about urban sustainability, food production spaces are so key. We have so many opportunities, in this time of crisis, where again we're coming together to fight to make this world a better place. We could be growing so much more food, especially here. In the global South is pointing the way, but we could do that here. And that blew my mind. Like when I came from the East Bay down to work here at Santa Clara, I was just I was like, oh my God, there's land everywhere, and the weather's better. You can grow like okra and really good tomatoes. And so, there's so much opportunity here if we can access those lands and use our leverage together to access more lands. This will enable, much better access to these nutrient-dense foods that we all need and that we lack. And this will absolutely improve food sovereignty and our struggle for food sovereignty. Through this work, we can create stronger and more organized communities. These are shared spaces for cultural sharing and for healing and nourishment. And we can metabolize urban waste. We have become these waste exporters, but there's so many of our waste streams that could be reincorporated, and food systems are a great way to create circular ways of living and ecological ways of living. I thought I'd give a couple of examples from Berkeley. I think I have a couple minutes. So this is from in the 90s, actually, when I was doing that work at Giltract and also helping with manage the student garden at Berkeley. We were immersed in a large collective of organizations. There were school gardens, there were community gardens, there were gardens that were specifically built around creating opportunities for youth. This is the one example, Berkeley Youth Alternatives. This is a garden, I think it was started in, I don't know, 92 or 93, something like that. And it's on something called the Santa Fe Right-of-Way, which is was an old train path through the city that got shut down. People were getting run over and stuff. And so it was vacant lots, a whole series of them from Oakland all the way up to Richmond. And the people organized to get access to these. So now there's bike paths, there's gardens, there's community orchards. But one example of how collectively people can come together and grab access to these lands that aren't being used. We got the city to give us better water rates because that is always a challenge. We got insurance, collective insurance policies, because for many gardeners, that was a barrier to get permission to access the land, is not being able to afford the insurance. Berkeley already, the city of Berkeley public library system, I think in the 80s, created a tool lending library with many power tools, like basically any tool you'd need for almost any project. You could go and take your library card and check that out. And I think they were one of the first ones to do that. We also created a tool library of our own by raising money collectively. I think there were like a dozen different garden-based organizations, and we got a shipping container put at Willard Junior High School, and there was full of tools, so that if you were doing a workday, you could go and check those tools out. So we would take turns on weekend workdays and access all those tools. The city had written a contract with compost. I think Berkeley was one of the first cities to actually, where you could do curbside pickup of your waste to make compost. And that compost was taken over to the Far East Bay to Livermore. And they wrote into the contract that the city gets a huge amount, a big truckload back every month. And so to this day, you can go down to the Berkeley Marina and anyone from anywhere can show up. And there's a beautiful big mountain of compost that's been dumped. And so you can go and grab that compost. For us, what we did is we made the city use their trucks to bring that stuff to us. And that was again an organizing thing that we did. And so we took turns, and that city truck would roll around. Actually, one of our people would drive that truck and bring these composts to us. And we got involved in these planning processes in reshaping the zoning laws and the plans so that we could sell and so that we could grow in spaces that weren't previously available for growing. And this was all through community organizing and collaboration. And I think I'll stop there.
Great. I'll pass the mic over to Derek.
Hello. If y'all don't mind, I'm gonna actually read my story here. And what a great panel. We went from like a overlook to a bit more local. Now we're about to really zoom in into the life of an urban ag man. And, so I want to start by saying I'm not a farmer. People call me a farmer, and I see it as a term of endearment. I see it as a word of honor and respect, but I am not worthy, right? I mean, I've never driven a tractor. I don't wake up at 4 a.m. every morning to go out there. I don't have acres of land. And so, to the farmers in the room, much respect to you all. And I wish I aspire to be like you. But, I am an urban ag man. I am a community gardener. And I started with this garden in my backyard, in my mother's backyard, actually. This was my first garden. I just got back home from college. I was working at a startup. I had a 2-year-old daughter that needed something, and I needed something to do with our time. So, as I started to develop this skill, I just grew more and more food, and I was very happy about it, as you see as a representation from my harvests. And then, through this experience, I started breaking the cycle of spending money on fast food. I learned how to cook, because what you grow, you must eat. And I shared harvest with friends and coworkers who were amazed. And I learned that I just developed a skill, a very rare skill these days, about growing food in small spaces. And so then I was laid off from that job, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna double down on this growing. And I'm gonna take this skill out into the world. And let's see. The pictures here are not chronological, okay, even though I'm telling my story. So these are kind of works that I did everywhere. But I decided to start gardens everywhere, backyards, balconies, tiny strips of land, front yards, wherever someone allowed me to, I would make it work. I was getting clients that really understood the power of growing your own food. I made a lot of collaborations, like that middle picture, that was a grow room that I actually worked with Santa Clara University students, the engineering team. Thank you very much. And, just everywhere I could grow, I would. And then, let's see. Then I started teaching, right? I went from actually starting gardens but I also got some skills, right? I became a master gardener, master composter. I'm volunteering at farms all the way from here to SF. I'm taking jobs working for landscapers. I'm working for millionaires in Milpitas Hills. Like, I was all over the place just trying to just get skills. I was tending to their orchards. And the knowledge and skills I had developed me landing teaching jobs and after-school programs in East Palo Alto. Eventually a full-time job as an enrichment teacher at Rocket Ship Schools in Eastside San Jose, teaching kinder through 6th grade. I'm gleaning and creating curriculum about nutrition, food systems, food distribution, microbiology, composting, and I went to school for like communication, guys. So like, I'm learning my best to like give this stuff to the children and to adults, and like obviously they're paying me for this stuff because they saw that there's value in even my little knowledge about these things. And let's see. Still, I was able to get these opportunities. Yes. The students and adults that I'm teaching, really were black and brown folks who really have complicated relationships with soil and with labor in the garden, right? And so I learned that my mission wasn't just teaching people how to grow food, but really like restoring their connection to where their food comes from. Allowing them to step into these public spaces and steward land that they don't own and let them know it's okay. Like you can take part of this land and still like take ownership of this land, right? And also like the mental and health benefits like to your spirit, and that's really still what I teach today, and people resonate with that. And and then like really like community gardens is like really where my test ground happened. This picture on the right is was an abandoned community garden plot owned by the school district, and I volunteered to take it over. And some of these pictures you're gonna see just like blank lands, no food on it yet, because when I see blank land, I see potential. I see what it could be, right? And let's see. So I didn't have a tiller, so people helped me till. I couldn't afford wood, so I used reclaimed wood to build structures. I couldn't afford manure or fertilizer, so I built compost bins and things like that. This picture on the left is the community garden at Eddie Souza. It's not far from here. It's owned by the city of Santa Clara. Please come visit. And I manage that for the city of Santa Clara now as my full-time job. But I want to show you this picture and like the transformation I had in the garden, right? Over time, I built relationships with the animals that visited the farm. There was people there killing the snakes, but I was making homes for them in my garden to assist with pest management. While others were poisoning their crops with pesticides, I learned to tolerate pests and adapted an abundance mindset. I was growing way more food that I can eat myself. And so I was sharing that food with people and realizing, hey, a few snails ain't gonna hurt, right? Or a lot of snails, actually. But, no need to poison the earth when all this abundance was coming to me. Let's see. So I observed animals that I only see in National Geographic documents. I had a video of this of this praying mantis eating a bee, and it was like just like the fact that I was there to just capture that and see that and sit in that land long enough to experience that. It's very spiritual. I mean, I spoke to birds that visited the garden, and then like my life became in sync with the seasons. You know, like I realized that I had to eat seasonally. When I knew rain was coming, I would plant seeds really quick to kind of save on water. I was cover cropping, intercropping, companion planting, and seed saving. These are all right. We've heard some of these things. This is the compost bin that I built. One day, the city dropped a big old ton of tan bark mixed in with leaves, and I saw an opportunity, so I built this bin real quick, and I threw it in there, and I made like the best compost just in this bin here. There's the chayote trellis that we built from reclaimed wood. Never had seen chayote before, but it was my Mexican brothers and sisters on that land that taught me how to grow and cook and use that. And so and then somebody told me, hey, put fish heads under your tomatoes so that you can add that fertilizer, and that's what our Native Americans did. So now I'm really getting in touch with the people that were on this land before we came, and I'm doing these practices in reverence to them. Let's see. So we're not just growing food. There's people gardens, right? And so besides fostering my relationship with the earth, I became connected with people from various backgrounds, and we would share all kinds of information. This is the pollinator posse, and at our community garden, we came through and teach people about pollinators. I had all kinds of folks come visit my garden and exposing them to community gardening for the first time. We're harvesting calendula, and I'm letting them feel those leaves on the those petals on a calendula. If you ever felt it, you will understand why. It's in a lot of natural lotions and things like that. And doing workshops together, we're bringing all kinds of people from all kinds of diversities to teach them how to grow. And I meet engineers. I'm meeting people from different cultures who are not too far removed from their ancestors doing things, and the cultural exchange that we have is amazing. And people from all kinds of societal backgrounds. And so we have garden shares. We have monthly garden shares where people come with diverse plants, various dishes, and harvests from their fruit trees. We teach each other about different foods and where they come from and how they use in their cultural background. Like, for instance, this is the hibiscus plant. The West Indians take the flower, or before it turns into a flower, they take that flower, put it in, and so my Latino brothers too. We put it in a tea, and you have a hibiscus drink. Have you ever had that? Well, the Indians cultures, they eat the leaves. And so, as we're having this exchange, we're like, oh yeah, I know that plant, I drink tea. Really? I eat the leaves, and then I taste the leaves. They have this citrusy taste. They're beautiful. And so now we're learning how this same plant is used in different cultures, and we're sharing that with each other to make a new resource for each other, finding new foods in the garden. And then at seed shares, awesome seed shares where we like to have a educational component about how you save seeds, only from heirlooms, not hybrid stuff. But this is where I found the sorghum plant. Sorghum it grows on a stalk that when you squeeze this stalk, you get this sugary drink, kind of like sugar cane, but way more sustainable to grow. The grains on top are naturally used for livestock feed, but can be ground into a bread. And also, this is a resource that can be used as ethanol fuel, way more sustainable than corn, right? And so, we talk about future foods and a planet of climate change. Sorghum is one of those. And how it resonates for me, it's grown in Africa. And so now I'm resonating with my ancestors and learning about and giving reverence to my own culture. I do want to tell you about this one family in my community garden, this Kenyan family, that they're awesome. They come as a whole family, and they grow food, and they're eating the leaves of beans, eating the leaves of pumpkins. They're eating plants that I thought were toxic, and they're doing all these they're just blowing my mind about how efficient they are, and they come together as a family, and they're really good at what they do. So they kind of take over these little plots, and I invited them to my big community garden plot in Milpitas, and they started to grow this corn that they would used to drive all the way to Sacramento to get. And this corn was very sacred to them because they make it, it's a huge base in many of their foods, this mukimo food, where you see here it's corn mixed in with the greens that they picked from the garden, mixed it with mashed potatoes that they grew in the garden. And they told me that ever since they started growing with me, they no longer go to the grocery store for greens. And I'm the same way. When I go to the grocery store, I feel guilty because I'm going down. I'm like, why do I have all this meat? Right? I'm eating because I do like meat. But all my greens, nobody's perfect. I'm working on it, brother. I'm working on it. But I got greens like all day at home, right? And now I'm learning from these families. I don't have to wait for the cabbage. I could eat the cabbage leaves, right? And then so this is just pictures of their corn, and so they no longer travel to Sacramento. This corn that you see, they grew all of it, and so I continue to work with them, and they continue to look for more land as well. I want to give it to them, and so bringing this home, all this time, I guess what I'm trying to do is build an agroecological city. And I got this term from the Berkeley Food Institute study, urban environments that merge food production, ecological function, and green spaces more common in rural communities that nevertheless support and enhance urban spaces as healthy, productive, community-oriented, and resilient to a changing climate. And, honestly, I didn't even know the term agroecological until a few weeks ago. But I have been doing this practice, and how I see it is you really can't have a successful urban garden without doing these practices. They only thrive when you take those principles of agroecology. And those are them right now. I mean, how diverse, what is more diverse than an urban ag site, a community garden, right? Efficiency, we have to be efficient. Recycling, all these things happen. I want to bring this home even more. Recently, the Silicon Valley Pain Index came out, and I'll read these stats to you. I'll start at the second one. We're at 22. It's our ranking of San Jose among U.S. cities with the largest increase in food prices, up 25%. 42% of children in Silicon Valley are at risk of food insecurity. And, 500,000 number of clients that Second Harvest serves, and it's up 40,000 from last year. So, what's going on there? From the same study from Berkeley Institute, they say in the East Bay, there are 35 urban ag farms provide food to 250 individuals per farm. It would take 1,200 urban farms to supply 50% of the population of Berkeley, Oakland, and Richmond. I took that math and applied it to our area. Our most populous cities are San Jose, Santa Clara, and Sunnyvale. And it would take 2,400 urban farms to feed 50% of that population. So, how can we do that? Well, one more stat, because I think people should be paid for this work. There's a lot of potential here. Right now, this is the market size value. Right now, it's at 160 billion, but by 2033, it could be 312 billion, right? So folks need to invest, corporations, cities, government need to invest in this work because there's a lot of potential there. How do we take these? This is a vacant lot I pass by every day to work. And I'm like, these are two homes on the side. They probably renters. How can we take this land here, this vacant spot, and turn it into this? This is the agri-hood in Santa Clara. This is another spot on my way to work. As we're developing, we need to make sure that every development that happens needs to have a space for a garden in it, right? So we could create more diverse food systems. This is a map from the UAIZ. It's a AB 551. People could get tax credits for actually lending their land to urban ag operation. And all these blue spots are vacant lands. This is a zoom in section of just my neighborhood. And all the stars are black-owned businesses that are around, right? But if you zoom out, there are more than 2,400 spaces for land. Absolutely. And so if you want to know that map, if you want to see that map and all the spaces available around here, go ahead and get that. It's an old map, so maybe some of those lands aren't there anymore. That's fine. But this is from the Berkeley Food Institute, and these are their 6 ways that you can, this is their recommendations on what we can do in the system to create more food opportunities. You can scan that and study. We're just going to carbon copy that and do that here in the San Jose. We're going to do that here. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. Please scan this. This is the blueprint on how to do it here. And that's it. That's it for me. Oh, yeah, this last picture. Look at that. Talk about resiliency. I found this. You heard of the rose that grew from concrete, Tupac, right? Look at this tomato that grew in a crack of a concrete on the side of a freeway. I mean, look, I mean, this is the representation of, like, how we can grow in the city to me. All right, thank you.
All right, let's give, well, I guess we all gave a round of applause, but how about a round of applause to all of our panelists today? We'll transition into the Q&A, so think about your questions, but I have a question for us to get started with first. What is one key challenge that organizations in the South Bay commonly face when implementing agroecological practices into local food systems?
I mean, it's funding, right? Like the land. There's a lot more land down here, and I think it's a little bit easier to access. It's definitely an issue, but it does seem like to me funding. And I think, you know, the foundations is so difficult writing grants and being stuck on these short-term cycles, and then they want everything. I think we need public resources and dedicate those resources. So that, for me, I think more people like Derek that are being paid to do this work to open up these incredible potentials that we have. That'd be my first take.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I do think the obstacles are, public support. I mean, I think the public support could be there, but political support behind the public support and land access funding. And then I think there is more we could do. I don't think it's the biggest obstacle, but we as a community need to come together to, follow some of those civic engagement strategies all the way through, and try to create these spaces to access this land more consistently, right?
I live in North San Jose. We used to be orchards. My streets are lined with fruit and walnuts and avocados and lemons. And, what changes in policy in our food system, what systems can be created to glean these trees and put this food back in the food system? I walk down the streets and I pick up oranges that fall on the ground, the sweetest oranges I've ever had. And I think, what kind of, how can we take backyard foods and create neighborhood farmers markets? And, I'm not too abreast on all the laws, but I know there's a lot of food safety concerns and things that we need to relook at and how we can actually take this urban food and make it available to everyone.
Any questions from the audience? And if you don't mind raising your hand and also introducing yourself when you ask your question.
Patrick, I know you mentioned grants. It's one of the that we need. It's also, as nonprofits, as you all know, we need the people to do the work. Right now, the grants that I'm looking at is they don't want to fund the work that we're already doing. They want us to be more creative. But at the same time, I don't have the people to be more creative. I mean, we could be more creative, but that time, how will you do that when grants are asking about innovative grants or doing more than we can? Oh, I'm Sofia from Sacred Heart Community Services, and I'm representing La Mesa Verde.
Sofia, I remember cutting my own pay when I was in the nonprofits and trying to keep my staff going, and it just sucks. Like that's where I feel like we spend so much money, as a public. Um, that's where I feel like having federal, like, the federal government. We send so much money from California, like we get less back than we send them. It looks half of it goes to war. Half of it goes to maintain military bases around the world, and so I think there's a reckoning in I feel like this time of crisis, there's a reckoning about who are we the people and what are our values, and shouldn't we be putting all those taxes we pay, all those resources, not like tax breaks through the foundations for wealthy people, but instead our money supporting the livelihoods of our people and our communities. And I feel like, like the work that Derek is doing, wow, what value you're bringing to this place. Like you're like a maximizer, like a catalyst to changing this place. And that's the investments that I want to see with my tax dollars. So that's where I get super frustrated with that foundation industrial complex. And I know that pain, of being in there. They're asking these crazy questions, like you have to make money doing education. That's not viable. It's not a for-profit thing. We need to meet our human needs. So that's where I guess my advocacy would be like, we need to push back. I'll give an example. Okay, so Dave Kakashiba, who I work for in the East Bay Asian Youth Center, and his team had this genius idea. This was, again, late 90s. But they decided, you know what? We don't have enough money. We're fighting with each other, all the youth organizations, to get resources. We're going to take on the city, and we're going to claim 1% of the city of Oakland's budget for youth. And it was called the Youth First Initiative. And so the kids in the programs were actually going out, and they wrote this law. They participated in this policy process and wrote this law that they won. It went up to the public, in one of the election cycles, and the people of Oakland voted that yes, 1% of the budget has to be dedicated to youth. So they created a permanent fund to support youth. And I feel like that's the kind of thing, that's the level where we have to fight to reclaim our resources for our shared commonwealth, our good, the good of our communities. So I guess that's my feeling, is I get so frustrated and mad with the foundation cycle and those crazy questions and the short-term funding and the lack of understanding that we've got to support what we've already got. I just learned yesterday that, and I hope it's okay to say this, that Vegilution is getting 65% of its funds from the feds right now. Wow, that we should be, the amazing work that Vegilution is doing, we should be funding that here as our community. And there's so much wealth here that I think we could access, but it's going to take political power to call that out. But to have that kind of vision that we can dedicate funds, to the common good.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I think there could be, and having the civic engagement strategy first, there could be an idea for even the short. I mean, first of all, many of the groups that this conference is possible because of a one-time allocation of about $900,000 for basically community food justice work from the county of Santa Clara, based organized around the food systems plan. It's a one-time grant. So one thing we can do as a collaborative, all the organizations that are co-sponsoring and participating and beyond, is say, look what we have done with this little bit of money over the last period of time. Tell the story. Use some of the things happening right now. Can that at least be a reoccurring fund to start with on a very short term? But then think about, I agree, Patrick, what if there was, I look at how universities have also changed our food system. If there was a built-in budget, 1% of San Jose's budget, or 1%, and think about this, county of Santa Clara is like a $6 billion annual budget. Think about that possibility, right? So that's where we can work upstream. And there could be strategies, special districts like the Open Space Authority and things like that could be partners in that type of work.
When I worked at Rocket Ship School on the east side, they were trying, that is a charter school district, and they were under review by the Santa Clara County Office of Education. What they did is they galvanized all the parents, all the members of their organization to come together and go visit the Office of Education and yell and fight and scream, or just give their testimonial of how great that charter school was for their community. Your organization should team up with your students, and there should be in all the great work we're doing, a small segment of that should be about how we can do that civic engagement and get together to go to our city council and start from that grassroots perspective. Give our testimonial about how the city, the county should start funding us so we're not so dependent